Feeling like a captive in your own thoughts? Well, it may be past lies that you're still believing that keeps you right there. On this episode of the Contagious Influencers of America podcast, find the truth to set you free.
And I just catch this glimpse of myself in the mirror as I walk by. And as I catch that glimpse, I just see who I am. And I think at that moment for me, it was just a realization that I was going to spend my whole life building what I'd come from and running, or stopping long enough to face it.
This is CIA and Contagious Influencers of America. I'm David Sams. Licensed therapist Jason VanRuler is in the Homestead studio today. He's here to share with us his personal story of brokenness and loneliness and how he found a way to shine a light in those very dark places and move forward. His latest book is called Get Past Your Past, How Facing Your Broken Places Leads to True Connection. And let me tell you, this guy has story after story that's going to inspire you, and it's going to just grab your heart and give you practical ways to start healing yourself from the inside out. So let's not waste any time. This guy's a winner, and he's got great stories, and he's got great tools for your toolbox. Let's get to my interview with Jason VanRuler. Jason, welcome to the Homestead.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to focus on one thing that I know we need to talk about, and that's getting past the land of living in the land of regret. Okay? And you've sort of become an expert at this.
Yeah.
But tell me your story.
Yeah, well, I didn't sign up to be an expert at this. I'll tell you that was never really the goal for me. But it's what I experienced. So I grew up in a broken home and went through, kind of all the things you don't want to go through as a kid, with some trauma and abuse and addiction. And so going through all of that and having a lot of volatility in my home, I left home thinking everything would be different. And so for me, I just kind of swore that I was going to change everything I'd experienced and be the opposite. But the challenge is I didn't really know how to do that. I knew I wanted to do that, but I didn't know what that actually meant. And so when you know it, although I had the best of intentions, I went and I started to just create the life I was running from because I'd never really dealt with it.
So tell me, what were some of the things you wanted to run away from, that you wanted to reinvent?
Yeah, well, the relationships that I had seen growing up were not healthy relationships. So I'd seen very toxic relationships that were abusive at times. I'd seen just mismanagement of things. I'd really seen a lack of even, pursuing of what God's will is for us. And so living in that space, it was just sort of a no holds bar, like whatever goes, goes. And if it's what I want to do, it's what I want to do. And people get hurt by that. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I was at the end that got hurt. And so for me, having experienced those things, I learned that relationships are hard. Relationships are wounding. You probably shouldn't trust anybody, right? Mm-hmm. God's there, but God's somewhere a long ways away, and sometimes pops in and sometimes doesn't. And so I just learned all these lessons, and the lessons for the most part were ones that were not so helpful to building the life I wanted.
So tell me about one of those times give me a story. Tell me something you had experienced that you lived through, that you look back on now and go, oh my gosh, how did I get through that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of them to draw from. I think for me, when my parents divorced, that was very challenging. And so that just kind of threw my whole life into chaos. And so didn't really have a schedule or anything like that. And my parents actually, they were not friends when they divorced. And so I had to go to court with them and testify and do all these things that kids really shouldn't have to do. And in doing those things, just felt like I'm never going to get through this, right? It just felt like the floor was always moving on me and I could never get stable. And so I just remember being a kid praying through how do I go through this situation with court where I'm going to please both parents so they love me when I have to pick a side? And so it just seemed to me to be this impossible task of trying to do the right thing and get people to love you at the same time. And so getting through that, I felt like, well, wow, I really did that. But later I learned I shouldn't even have had to do that. And so I think for a long time, I didn't even know what I didn't know. And so I just felt like there was a right way to operate in the wrong room. And what I've learned getting healthier is that the right way to do it is to not be in that room.
And how did you learn that? What happened that you were able to get that bolt of lightning or that knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say I did that quickly, but I tell everybody I'm kind of a slow learner. So like I said, I left home after graduating and of course was going to create a different life. And then I remember it pretty distinctly because I was living in Minneapolis at the time. And I woke up one morning and it was a morning after I'd gone out. I drank too much, smoked marijuana, woke up, had $0 in my wallet. No money left on a credit card. They were maxed out. And literally kind of one of the first thoughts of my brain was, where did I park my car? Because I was a little worried they might repo it. Okay. And so I'm thinking about this. I'm stressed. I don't feel well. And I'm walking in my apartment and I just catch this glimpse of myself in the mirror as I walk by. And as I catch that glimpse, I just see who I am. And I think at that moment for me, it was just a realization that I was going to spend my whole life building what I'd come from and running or stopping long enough to face it. And so I'd like to say that one decision changed everything, but it was actually that decision times 1,000. That was just the starting point for me.
So for somebody that's going through something like-minded right now, what signs should they take in and say, okay, this is the path that this is the door that God's opening for me, and I should recognize that the door is open so I can get past my past hurts?
Yeah, I think we always have the ability to do something, right? That something might not be huge. It might not change your life in one move. But I think we have to look at, and everyone views God differently, but God's not calling us to these unhealthy relationships. He's not calling us to be small and to abandon ourselves and live in pain. And so what steps can I take, as small as they are, even today? So I tell somebody, even today, if you're hearing this, what is one small thing you could do today that you feel like would make your life better? And maybe that's just eating a little healthier or not drinking so much, but whatever that small thing is, do that instead of spending all your time thinking about the big thing, because the big thing just leads us to be overwhelmed and get stalled out before we start.
Tell me about the past powers of future and how to accept your past in order to move forward in life.
Yeah, so I work with so many different people, and in my career, I've been really lucky to work with people all the way coming out of prison, all the way up to people who are, professional athletes and performers. And so what I found, regardless of where we come from or socioeconomic status, is that if we haven't dealt with and examined what we learned in our past, we just replicate that. And so there is really good stuff and fruitful stuff that comes from identifying, am I operating with an outdated system? Because some of the things we learned maybe never were accurate, or maybe weren't helpful, or maybe just were accurate in that time, but they aren't today. And so if we never take the time to look at that, we just keep doing it, right? And so it's in the continuing to do it, we often get stuck.
Okay. So, you have something called the POV method. Explain that to me.
Yeah. Yep. So it's basically the process I walk clients through. So it's looking at the past, right? And it's changing our relationship with it. So what did I learn from my past experiences? Are those true? Are those helpful? Are those current? Right? And then we look at right now. How do we own where I'm at presently and really own it? Not do that thing where we kind of, gloss over it or give the social media version, but how do we actually own where we're at today? And then what is our vision for the future? Right? So if this is where we're at today, what is our vision for the future? And what are the steps that we would take to get there?
So give me an example of how you would put the POV method to use. Give me a practical.
Yeah. So a lot of times, I mean, there's some common messages, but a lot of times from the past, we might get a message like, I'm not enough, right? I just will never measure up no matter what I do. And so that might be the message we take. And that might be the message that we received when we weren't very good at a sport we really wanted to be good at in high school. Okay. And so maybe you weren't good enough to make the varsity team in high school, but is that true today? Or is that a general truth about you? It's probably not, right? So how do we kind of take that and say, well, what is more accurate? Well, maybe what's more accurate about that, if we're kind of looking at the past, is that I wasn't a varsity football player, right? I maybe really love football, but that wasn't for me. But that's not about who I am as a person, right? That was about that thing. And so what is the better truth about that experience? Well, the better truth is I really care about football, but I wasn't a varsity athlete, and I'm otherwise just fine. Right? So how do we take that? And then we look at in our life now today, how do we own where we're at today? Well, where I'm at today is I'm doing well, but my relationship's really struggling, or I'm always overworking because I feel like I'm not good enough. Okay. Well, what is the vision for our future? Or what is God calling you to do? What do you think that would look like? Well, my vision for the future is that I have greater happiness and contentment. Okay. Well, how do we update that message? How do we own where we're at today? And then what do we need to do to get there, right? Well, I need to work less, or I need to invest in my relationships, or I need to find a way for me to get to a place of valuing myself more. And so each step would include some tasks, but the goal really with that is to get people to move. You know, one of the biggest challenges we have is insight is great, right? As a therapist, we talk a lot about insight, but insight without action just keeps us stuck. We really don't get anywhere. And so how do we pair the insight with the action?
And why is it so important for us to deal with our brokenness head on, as opposed to just moving forward and not looking in the rear view mirror?
Yeah, well, plenty of us do, right? I mean, that's definitely something I tried to do for a long time. And so I definitely understand why people would want to do that. And I'd relate to that. I think the challenge is if we don't, we tend to have the same problems over and over again, and they're often tied to that, right? And so it's kind of like if you ever watch Scooby-Doo, the villain is wearing a mask, but it's always the same person, right? They're always like, well, it's the same person in a different outfit. And I think if we don't deal with our past, the problems we have are usually the same things in a different outfit, right? And so the goal is, yeah, is it difficult to look at some of this stuff? Sure. But if our choice is to look at it and deal with it and eliminate it or change our relationship with it versus adapt and have to deal with it forever, I think I just as soon deal with it because I'm going to get something out of that. The other one just means that I'm adapting, and that adaptation isn't actually growth.
So then again, I'd like for you to just tell me a story that's all about you, and that is, how did you do that? How were you able to look at your brokenness and deal with it head on?
Yeah. So I think if I go back to what I was talking about, that day in the apartment, one of the messages that I had taken from my past was that I'd never be anybody. Right. I was maybe a weird habit as a kid, but I actually journaled as a kid, if you can believe that. And so had one of my journals, and in the journal I wrote, someday I want to be a psychologist, and I want to live in a big city, and I want to write a book, all the things I'm doing today. But the message that I took away from my childhood was that none of that would be for me because of what I've been through. Okay. Because what I'd been through made me broken. And so that was a whole person's dream, not a broken person's dream. And so I abandoned that because that's what I had learned, is that good things aren't for you. And it doesn't really matter what you do. It doesn't really matter how you do them. It's just not going to work out. And so for me, I didn't have a POV method when I started. That sure would have been helpful, but I didn't. But over time, that's the process I went through, right? Is I had to learn, okay, well, what was that message? Well, that message is I'll never be anything. Is that accurate? No, for me, it wasn't accurate. What was accurate is that I was helpless as a kid to change my parents. That was true. There's nothing I could do to change them. And kids aren't able to do that. And so that was disappointing and it was sad. But that's an outdated belief to carry as an adult. Because as an adult, I can change things. And so when I kind of realized that this message I was carrying with me was outdated and it was more circumstantial, I began to see, well, maybe actually there is room for me to do something. So where am I at today? Well, today your wallet's empty. Today, your car might get repoed. Today, you're drinking too much. You're doing all the wrong things. And so what is our vision of the future? Vision of the future for me is sitting here today. That might sound odd to you, but to me, this was the vision I cast for the future that I'd wanted my whole life. And so once I could identify that, what steps do I need to take to get there? I would have loved it if that was a 1-year process. It wasn't, right? It's taken me many, many years, but that's what we try to walk out with clients and in our own lives is then what are the steps we take along the way to get to that place?
Hi, I'm Jackie Dorman. Are you longing for your soulmate? And maybe you've tried everything and you feel like nothing's working. You've done the online dating, the singles ministry, possibly even the dreaded blind dates set up by well-meaning family and friends. And you're starting to wonder, where are the truly Christian men that want to seek me out for a committed, loving relationship without the head games? Well, I'm here to help. I want you to join me for my free Married in 12 Months challenge, where I am going to show you all the tools you need to step into the love story that God has already written about you. I'm going to teach you about why now is your time, why God wants you married even more than you want to be married, what are the lies that are holding you back, the law of attraction that's biblical, and what are the tools to stepping into that bride that you want to become. So join me at lovestories.com for my free Married in 12 Months challenge, where we'll get you out of the waiting room and into the love story that you've been dreaming of. Join me at lovestories.com. I hope to see you there.
You talk about smart vulnerability, 5 characteristics of a safe person you can be vulnerable with. First of all, how do you know you can trust that person?
Yeah, you do it incrementally, right? So the danger is if I come from an environment where people are unsafe and then I decide that I want to try vulnerability out, what I see people do often, what I've done myself, is we then really share vulnerable stuff, right? We say, okay, now I've decided I'm going to be vulnerable with you. But if we don't qualify that, what is likely to happen is we choose the wrong person because we're choosing people we've known. And they don't know what to do with it, or they don't respond well to it, or they're not in a place with capacity. And so we leave feeling rejected and it shuts us down. So the way we find safe people is to try incrementally to let them in, right? So that might even just look like saying generally, I'm struggling, right? We might not have to tell them every single detail, but I'm struggling. Okay, how do they receive that? Right? Are they good stewards of that information? Do they help me? Mm-hmm. If they do, maybe I can lean into that a little bit more. But we have to really work through that process, because otherwise what people do is they try it, they get rejected, and then that confirms that story, and they say, see, this is why I don't do this. Mm-hmm. See, I got all my courage up and I tried with this person, and this person might not have even known that was your one shot at vulnerability, and now they blew it, and so I'm done. And so what I try to talk to people about is just to give them a chance to be successful. And so we got to work towards that, which means just starting out small, just acknowledging, here's where I'm at, here's where I'm struggling. Mm-hmm.
So tell me some of the other characteristics of a safe person.
Yeah. They want to help you, right? So they actually want to help you. And so what I would call it is not having an agenda. Sometimes we tell people things that have an agenda about where our life needs to go. And so that help is more about them than us. And so you want to find a person who just generally wants to see you do the thing you're supposed to do. Someone that can hold our confidentiality and is safe in the way we ask them to be, right? We might say, this is just between you and I. I think also someone who can reciprocate that vulnerability. Right? It's not a very authentic relationship if I'm only able to give you vulnerability and I don't get it back, right? That feels really dangerous. If I'm saying, hey, let me tell you guys all my secrets, and what are your secrets? And you go, we're not going to share those with you. That's probably not the right person for you. And then one that has the availability and capacity to actually show up for you. So sometimes people have all of the above, but they're in a season of life where they just can't be that person to you. And so we need to find someone who's willing and who has the time to do it.
But how do you find somebody who's not going to judge you?
Yeah. I think you need to really get to know the person a little bit first, right? So I think that might start with having coffee or having a phone call, but you need to talk to them a little bit. The best thing we can do, I think, is try to find somebody in a place that has some sense of understanding about what it is you feel you're struggling with. because they get it. They've maybe been there, right? So if you talk to me and you said, hey, Jason, I'm struggling with managing my money, or I'm struggling with drinking, or things like that, I would gladly hear that, right? You're not going to get any judgment from me because I've lived it. And so I think finding people who have lived your experiences and got to the other side is really, really important. Not saying other people can't help, but sometimes we approach people who have no grasp of those things and we get judgment because they're just not familiar with it. And so we want to find somebody kind of adjacent to the things we're going through.
So is that is the best place to find that a support group?
Yeah, I mean, that's one place. I think that can be hard for people. That's sometimes a challenge to start with that. I think it could be a pastor, a friend, I think a mentor.
Yeah, but how do you find a pastor or anybody in the Christian world who's not going to judge you? How do you find that person? Because they all say they'll judge you and then they judge you.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying everybody, but we've all been through this.
Sure.
Oh, I'm not going to tell you about this or that, or I'm going to tell you about this or that. And next thing you know, it's, an issue. I'm trying to get. I mean, it all sounds good.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
It all makes sense to me.
Okay.
But let's say you got a porn issue, or you got a drinking issue, or you got a, oh my gosh, I do these terrible things issue. How do you find somebody that you can trust to talk about this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you kind of want to guarantee you can trust somebody, you'd probably go to a therapist, right? Because that's what they're there for.
And most therapists I know need a therapist.
Well, we do, and we have them. I am a therapist who has a therapist because I think if I don't, that's a problem. Yeah. So I'd say if that, for you, if you can't identify somebody immediately in front of you that could do that, I think there are professionals that can help where it's literally their job. I think the challenge, though, is whether it's a professional or a person, we can't guarantee anybody is going to do anything, right? And so that is some of the risk that we take to step out and be in vulnerability, is that sometimes it isn't going to work, right? And so that's, again, if we come back to, are we choosing to grow in this, or are we choosing to run from it? If we're choosing to grow in it, that means sometimes it's not going to work, right? Sometimes we're going to find somebody and we're going to be disappointed. And some of what makes that easier is to realize that sometimes we disappoint other people too, right? Sometimes people are really needing us and we don't show up the way they need to. But I think you can try to set yourself up for success by having people who, again, really understand what you're going through, either because they've told you that or it's their job to, and then starting incrementally with them.
Mm-hmm. And, when you look back on your life and you see this journey that you've been on, what is the one thing you wish you would have done differently sooner?
That's a great question. I wish I would have just been myself. I spent so much of my life just trying to pretend to be somebody else. And if I'd just been myself earlier, I would have got help earlier. I think I would have been happier. I just think I would have enjoyed the process a little bit more. It's kind of like this when I was having that struggle, I'm in the apartment. One of the things that I do is I had this job downtown, and it didn't pay very well, but it was a job downtown, and so it looked kind of cool. And so I would buy these, I can't believe I'm sharing this, but I would buy these like Italian dress shirts. Okay. But I've always been a broad-shouldered fella. So I'd buy these slim-fitting Italian dress shirts that were really too small for me. Okay. And so I wanted to do that because I wanted to be the guy that wore that stuff. And so I would wear them to the office, and the buttons would be pushing out and I'd be sweating. And I just have to do that thing all day where I moved in a certain way so as not to pop the button, where I moved in a certain way so it didn't pop out, where I moved in a certain way so the buttons between them, the space didn't show too much. I just lived so much of my life doing that, and it was exhausting. And what I never realized is that the people who love me well, they never cared about that. In fact, they thought it was weird, right? When I finally said, hey, here's who I really am, is I'm kind of like a t-shirt and jeans guy. They're like, okay. Like that was it. There was no big change. There was no big fallout. And so what I learned is just, I spent so much of my life trying to pretend who I thought everybody else wanted me to be. And that blocked me from getting help, and it blocked me from having the relationships that I wanted. And if I could go back, I would have just said to 20-year-old Jason, take that shirt off. That looks ridiculous. And just put a t-shirt on and be you. Because people love you anyway.
Do what I do. Have 3 different sizes of wardrobe. You'll be fine.
Well, where were you? You could have helped me out a lot. That would have been great.
Okay, let's talk about courage, because you say courage is required, and so how do you find courage to be loved?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough, and especially if we feel we haven't been loved before, we've been rejected, that can be really risky. And especially if that rejection has come from our parents. You know, if you think about it, when you're a kid, if your parents don't love you and they don't take care of you, you'll die, right? I mean, we have to rely on them. And so then taking a step into connection can feel very risky. And it is. And so we need to acknowledge that, but then also to make it a small step. So again, if we aim too big initially, which is what I see a lot of people do, and then we face rejection or someone's not able to show up for us, then what happens is we decide that then this message was correct. And so what I would tell people is, yes, there is courage that is required, but make it small. We can be courageous in small bursts, right? And we'll work up to the big stuff. But maybe the first step is just to call somebody. Maybe it's to ask someone to have coffee. It doesn't have to be the outcome immediately. It's just a step along the way.
So there are folks listening right now who are at their wits' end. They've been through hell and back over the last 3 or 4 years. They're very confused right now. Do I go back to work? Do I do what I'm doing? Do I really want to go back to that job that I had for 20 years before the pandemic? There's just a lot of confused folks right now, and I suppose you're hearing a lot of these stories. What can you tell people about moving forward, about getting on with their lives without thinking, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to make a mistake"? How do you just put one foot out and start to move forward?
Yeah. Well, and I would just tell you, if you're in that spot, I feel for you. I mean, I can relate. I've felt in that place before, and that's a really tough place to be. And I think sometimes I've heard people like myself and other authors where I might heard their message and just thought, "Oh man, this sounds great. Good for you, Jason. That sounds good. But what about me, right? And what do I do with that?" So to answer your question, I think it's just kind of starting off with what is working now and what's not, right? Let's just start there. And so if I can identify that, I know what I want to build on. And so maybe I don't know what I want, but maybe I even know what I don't want, right? Well, here are the things I don't want. And then start with there. So some people can easily identify what they want. For some, they can identify what they don't want, but start there and then take one step. What we're trying to do is just collect data about where we need to be. I didn't know that I was going to end up here today, right? This is the result of lots of little steps, and here I am. And so I would just tell you, don't get so connected to the outcome has to be this specific thing. Just get connected to, I want to be a student, and this is practice. And so I'm going to practice doing the next thing. And I may learn that I loved it. I may learn that I hated it, or I might just learn that it's neutral in the middle. But all that information is useful to getting to where we want to go.
If you look 2-3 years down the line, and you are trying to figure out some predicament you're in today, how do you look at things differently now after putting all this practice to use? How do you look at things differently now as you're looking 18, 24, 36 months forward than you did back then?
Yeah, I'm much more concerned with day to day being the person I want to be then. That's really what I focus on. I think where I got so stuck before is I knew there was this huge gap between who I was and who I wanted to be. And I just looked at that all the time. And so that was this constant reminder of the disappointment that I had and how I wasn't measuring up. And I think what I do differently today is I have some ideas about the future. Like I know a general area of where I want to go, but I'm much more interested in how did I show up today? Because what I found is if I learn to show up today and give my all, some days will be great, some days will be terrible, and some days will be average, but I will end up in the right place for me. And, I would say for me, many, many times, the place I end up is so much better than I imagined. So much better. And so I've just learned that to really lock myself into it has to look like this gets me in trouble. But instead, who do I want to be today that I actually can be? And where does that person go? And oftentimes it surprises me with how wonderful it's been.
And how do you deal with all the noise? How do you deal with the noise of friends telling you this and that, and then you go on social media and you get all this peer pressure, or all these people telling you this and that? How do you put all of this together without being impacted by all the noise?
Yeah. Well, I think, unfortunately, we live in a world where we are all impacted, whether we want to be or not, to some degree, right? But I think we have a lot of say over that. And so I think there are going to be some places and things that are just not going to help us get where we want to go. And so we're going to have to be ruthless with eliminating some of that stuff. And so if you are a person who, let's say, is struggling with self-worth, but you're logging onto social media every day, getting reminded of who you're not, social media's got to go, right? So I think we at some point need to say, is this helping me? And if it's not helping me, how do I eliminate it? Because we don't need it, right? And so I think there will always be competition for our attention. That's nothing new. It's going to continue to be that way and probably get worse. But I think we have to get really intentional with what we put in is where we're going, right? And so if what we're putting in is a bunch of noise, we're not going anywhere with that. And so what I would tell people is, if you're trying towards a goal, find people and media and things that support that. Don't go to the place that's unhealthy and try to find health. Go to the place that is healthy and eliminate the rest, especially if it hurts you.
I just wonder how, everything is so just blown up and magnified. I mean, everything is just, back when I was in school, it was all about impressing the girl you wanted to take out, right? It was like maybe a couple of people. Now it's like millions on social media. It's right. Like, you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or dress the wrong way or whatever. It's like, it's a big deal. And it's just like, and everybody pours it on. I just don't know how you're 13 years old these days and deal with that kind of pressure.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I've got a 13-year-old, and so the hope is parents are helping with that. But yeah, they are exposed to it. And so I think knowing that and knowing that that's going to be part of life and having good boundaries around it is important. And just also having a sense of self. I think that's the challenge too, is if we don't know who we are, we're kind of open to a lot of messages. And so helping people kind of figure out, who am I really, right? And is this a place I want to go? Is this a place I want to be? But to your point, yeah, I grew up and, cell phones were just starting to be a thing. And goodness, I'm sure glad that was the case, because I don't know how I would have done it today. I would have really, really struggled. And so I'm not going to be here and tell you it's easy, because it's not. But I think if we work together, we can manage it.
Well, it's just crazy because I think now, about the biggest thing my parents had to deal with was probably, you can't watch that TV show. Now, as one big deal, right? A TV show. Now it's like, now you've just got all of these things to contend with as a parent. I mean, how do you deal with a 13-year-old who's, I'm sure you don't take away the phone for a month and say you can't be on the phone, right?
That's exactly what I do. No, that's what I'd love to do.
Yeah,
I mean, that would be...
How could you even do that?
Well, it'd be awesome. I don't think I'd be very popular.
It'd be abusive. You get a call from...
CPS might say, we heard you took the phone away. Yeah, no, I don't go that far, but we are intentional. We do manage that. We do have conversations about it. So I think part of that's really important is just the communication about how it's going to look and how it's working.
And when you get that, do they roll their eyes, or do they really take it in, or?
I'm a therapist and I've got a therapist son. So it's, I'm very blessed in that way that he gets it, right? Because we talked about it a lot. But again, that's the thing we've talked about his whole life. And so it's not been a surprise that's how we're going to look at it. And so what I would tell parents is just to really lean into that conversation. And what our kids usually need is they need the parent we wish we'd had. And so be that person to your kid, especially now, because they really, really need that.
But then there are other parents who go, yeah, we're going to do it up. I'm going to do you up. I'm going to give you the look. I'm going to do the whole, you're going to be absolutely the most desired person on the planet.
Sure.
And they're doing that with 12 or 13-year-olds.
Yeah. And my question would just be, is that what's best for them, or is that what's best for you? Because I think if we're not careful as parents, and this is really any area, we can get into a place where we're doing a lot of stuff because of us, and it's not because of them. And so if we're thinking with their best interest at heart and what's healthy for them, is that doing those sorts of things.
So what do you hope that people take away from your book?
Yeah, my hope is that if they're feeling stuck, or they're feeling like they haven't reached their potential, or they're feeling just like they're stuck in these patterns that just keep replicating and they can't figure out why, or they're too much or not enough, that they understand that there actually is a pathway out of that, and there is a pathway to health. There's a pathway to reaching that potential in the life you're called to. And that's what I break down for you, right? So what I wanted to do was not to write a book full of clinical terms, because nothing against people who do that. But to me, what I would want is just practical steps to take. And that's what the book is just practically speaking, how do we get from where we're at to where we're going, and do that in an efficient way.
So just to go over those practical steps again, what are the most practical steps that you can give our listeners a gift right now? Give them the secret.
Yeah, well, the secret, I guess if I'm going to reveal it here, is relationships. The truth of the matter is, we don't do the healing we need to do. We don't get to the place we need to go if we don't know how to do relationships. And that's something, again, that I think took me a long time to learn, because I just thought if I just do all the right stuff on my own, then I'll get there. But that's actually not how the world works, and it's not even what we're called to. And so the secret sauce of the whole book is that we need to find people to help us, and we need to find people we can help. And when we have those relationships, that's actually how we get that quality of life we want.
Well, thank you, my new friend. Thank you for the encouragement, and thank you for stopping by the homestead.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thanks again, Jason. What a great guy. Again, his latest book is called Get Past Your Past, and you can get it online or at the bookstore. It's a good one and well worth your time. And of course, check out our websites at contagiousInfluencers.com. We're going to find all kinds of great episodes and our radio show. Why do I say our radio show website? Because it's so much more than that now. It's a whole platform of videos and audios and inspiration and music and storytelling, things that will really inspire you regardless of the season of life you happen to be in right now. So do check out KeepTheFaith.com, KeepTheFaith.com. And oh, by the way, when you check out our website or all of our podcast episodes, please do rate them, review them, and tell your friends about them. Okay, that'd be wonderful. We really appreciate it. And this week, do me a favor, go out there and live that life in living color, because it sure is a heck of a lot more interesting than living in black and white. See you next time.